It began with the numbers on the ATM screen. I had gone there, as I had 100 times before, expecting the usual comfort of seeing the savings I'd built over a lifetime. 42 years in construction, every shift in the cold, every backbreaking hour under the sun, all of it carefully tucked away for one purpose: to keep me safe when I was old. But when I pressed the keys, the machine blinked back at me with words that hollowed my chest. Insufficient funds. I thought it was a mistake. I tried again, different card, different account. Same result. The receipt printed out, and in my trembling hands I saw it. Balance zero, withdrawal completed just that morning. My knees weakened right there on the pavement. Inside the bank, the clerk told me the truth. The account wasn't hacked. No thief in the night had cracked into my life. No, it was simpler, crueler. My daughter had access as a joint holder. She had taken everything. Every penny. When I called her, she didn't even hide it. "Dad, I know why you're calling. Yes, I took it all. I need the money more than you. You'll manage somehow." Her voice was colder than winter steel. I begged her, reminded her that it was my retirement, that I had nothing else. She laughed, actually laughed, and then she said words that cut deeper than any knife. "It's my house now, Dad. I'm tired of looking after you. You should start thinking about where you'll sleep once I change the locks." I remember standing there in the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, watching people live their normal lives, buying groceries, laughing with children, while mine collapsed in a single moment. My own flesh and blood, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, wanted me gone, discarded like trash. But here's the thing, grandson, or whoever listens now: betrayal doesn't end with silence. Not when it comes from under your own roof. That day, something broke inside me. And something else, something harder, took its place. If she wanted war, she would get war. And I already knew the first step. The first night after her threat, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my old leather chair, the one that had molded to my back after decades, staring at the photographs on the mantel. There she was, my little girl at 10 years old, grinning with missing front teeth, clutching the bicycle I had bought her. There she was again at 17, in her blue graduation gown, saying she'd make me proud. And at her wedding, where I stood beside her, beaming like a fool, never imagining she'd one day sharpen her smile into a weapon. The rage burned hot, but underneath it was something colder, something steady. She thought I was an old man who would crumble, who'd shuffle off into some shelter or onto a park bench, broken and harmless. That was her mistake. She had forgotten who raised her, who taught her that consequences always followed choices. I began by moving quietly. I still had the deed to the house. She hadn't thought of that. My name was on every document, every utility, every insurance form. The roof above her head was built on my sweat, my payments, not hers. If she wanted to throw me out, she'd first have to prove she owned something. And she didn't. The next day, I paid a visit to an old friend, Carl, a lawyer I'd known since we were young men. He looked at me with pity when I explained, but then he leaned across his desk and said something that steadied my resolve. "Wyatt, she can steal your money, but she can't steal your backbone. You've still got the law on your side. Use it." So I filed paperwork. Quietly. Methodically. While she slept late and made plans for her shiny new life, I laid the foundation for her ruin. But revenge, my boy, isn't just about legal papers and signatures. It's about making them feel the weight of their own choices. I wanted her to learn what it was to be abandoned, to stand in the ruins of her greed, the same way she wanted me left out on the street. That evening, she came home with shopping bags. I watched her from the window, her face glowing with arrogance. She thought she'd already won. She thought I was too weak to fight back. I smiled to myself in the dim light of that living room. because the war had only just begun. She always underestimated quiet things, a long winter, an old dog's patience, the way a book train waits without complaint until you decide to board. She thought my silence meant surrender. That night, when she padded upstairs in slippers and dropped her keys on the hallway table like a declaration of victory, she didn't hear the folder sliding into the bottom drawer of my desk. She didn't notice the small stack of certified letters I'd arranged to be sent first thing in the morning. She didn't know that I had spent the last week learning other people's names: accountants, a housing inspector, a woman at the county clerk's office who'd taken pity on an old man and expedited paperwork for a fee. I let her think she was untouchable. Let her dance through the house with careless toes because revenge tastes better when it's slow-cooked. I fed her coffee twice a day, patched a torn sleeve when she forgot her jacket on the couch, and listened as she rattled off plans for a new life in a place 4 states away, plans that included new furniture, a man whose laugh I didn't trust, and, somewhere buried in her sentences, the assumption that I would disappear like refuse. The morning after she emptied my accounts, she found a notice tucked under the cereal box. A polite, official-looking envelope that could have been a jury summons or a library fine. She slid it open with the bored, elegant fingers she always used when paying for something expensive. The paper inside was short and bureaucratic, a formal notice of lien against the property for unpaid property taxes dating back 3 decades. Taxes that had mysteriously never been assessed until a thin man from the county office found my old ledger during a routine audit. The thin man had asked a single question when I handed over the copies. "You sure these are in your name?" I'd nodded and let him do the rest. The lien was legitimate. The paperwork was clean. The timing was exquisite. She flipped the paper, lips tightening. For a second, I thought panic might finally show up on that face I remembered as a child smiling for the school camera. But the mask snapped into place. She called, loud and sharp, demanding to know who had sent the letter. I told her, slowly, the truth that tasted of iron. "You did. You made this possible." I didn't explain then. Why give her time to stitch together excuses? Why hand her pieces of the noose we were about to tighten? That afternoon, I invited Mrs. Calloway from 3 doors down over for cake. She'd watched our family through years of picket fences and broken promises. When she came, I poured tea and watched Vera's irritation thicken into something else in the corner, where she tried to scroll through her phone with one hand while rearranging her plans with the other. Mrs. Calloway asked about the house, casually, like a neighbor, and Vera answered on autopilot, reciting the lines she'd been rehearsing since dawn. The woman's slow, knowing smile was an instrument. She mentioned, softer than a prayer, that landlords in the neighborhood had been talking, and that some people were whispering about someone who'd lost everything in a morning and was being rather public about it. Vera's hand trembled. It was small. I had not touched her. Legal pressure was only the skeleton of the plan. I needed humiliation to be her teacher. People respect what they fear. They pity what they conquer. I started leaving little things unlocked. The mailbox, the gate, the same flimsy attic window she'd once used to sneak out for a late-night rendezvous in college. Not to invite thieves. No, that would be vulgar and cruel, but to let rumors begin, to give fuel to the gossip that would hollow out her new life like termites. In towns like ours, reputation is currency. She had burned mine for a bag of cash. I would bankrupt her in the only coin she valued more now: dignity. Then came the phone calls. A concerned neighbor who just wanted to warn her that someone had been seen taking photos of the house in daylight. A woman from the mortgage office calling to explain, in careful, sympathetic tones, that a clerical error required her immediate presence to prevent foreclosure proceedings. A kindly man presenting himself as a buyer for the antique dresser in the parlor, an antique she'd loved to use as a staging prop when she hosted friends who wanted to come by with a truck at noon to assess value. Each call was a pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples widened until the surface broke. At night, while she lay awake plotting her escape route, I sat at the kitchen table with a ledger of my own. Names, dates, little notarized statements from the past that proved my ownership, copies of utility bills, the canceled checks where I'd paid for her braces, the receipts from the van I'd helped her buy, the registration proving my address. Each document was a bone in the structure I was building. I filed them where the law could find them, and where shame followed. When she discovered them, weeks later, the realization would land like a fist. "Papa," she said once, with a venom she wrapped in false tenderness, "why can't you just be grateful? We freed you. We gave you options." Her eyes were flat glass. She had convinced herself that generosity could be weaponized into entitlement. I wanted her to feel the weight of emptiness that morning had put into my chest, the same hollow that had made old men withered and small on park benches. I wanted her to understand that taking from a life built piece by piece is a kind of violence we should recognize. So I arranged a meeting, a small gathering at the kitchen table that included her boyfriend, the thin man from the county office, who'd become unexpectedly genial over a shared love of old cars, and Mrs. Calloway. It looked like civility. It looked like negotiation. I smiled politely, while the seeds I'd planted sprouted into awkward silence. When I finally spoke, I did it in the voice I used to soothe bruised knees and first loves. I told the simple story: who paid for what, who'd signed which paper, where the mortgage stood, who the insurer had been for 30 years. I let each name fall like a pebble into the room. Vera's boyfriend shifted in his chair. The thin man's jaw clenched. Mrs. Calloway sat forward, eyes sharp as winter glass. "Dad," Vera hissed, trying to pull me back into the private theater she'd staged. "You can't do this. You don't understand law, procedure." "Oh, I understand more than you think," I cut in, and for a heartbeat she saw the man who had taught her to ride, to drive, to never back down from a hard day's work. "I understand consequence. I understand what it means to build something, and to lose it because someone decided they owned your heart. You wanted me on the street. You tried to make me small. I prefer you learn how it feels to be the one left on the curb." Her face went white not because of the paper on the table, but because something colder had crept into the room, something inexorable. The thin man cleared his throat and asked about the lien, murmured that with the right filings he could expedite a notice that would freeze access to any assets pending further investigation. Mrs. Calloway offered to speak to the book club and the church ladies. Small avalanches began to roll. She was starting to look frightened, not for the money she had, but for the thing under her belly that relied on other people's opinion. And for the first time since that awful morning, the scales shifted. Outside, the oak leaves shivered in an October wind, and I knew the next moves would have to be careful as clockwork and sharp as wire. Revenge had become an education, and I intended to teach her everything I knew. She had always loved the sound of her own victory before she learned how hollow it would echo. The morning the bank called to confirm the freeze on our accounts, Vera walked into the kitchen humming, hair tossed like she'd just stepped out of a glossy advertisement. She poured coffee as if pouring contempt, and when she saw the sealed envelopes on the counter she smiled the way a cat smiles before it pounces. "Trash mail?" she asked, thumb through the stack with casual cruelty. I drank my tea slowly and let the room fill with the ordinary noises of a house, the kettle's whistle, the refrigerator's rhythm, while I watched her read. The first envelope was from the mortgage company, the second from the county. Notices, polite but official, that access to funds and certain utilities had been temporarily restricted due to a pending investigation into unusual transfers. The third was from a trustee I'd hired discreetly the week before, a man who specialized in cleaning up messes like the one she'd made. He'd begun the motions to place certain holdings into a protective trust for the benefit of my grandson, and to ensure that essential bills would be paid even if she thought she'd taken everything and could vanish. She looked up at me like a snake caught in sunlight. "What is this?" she said, but the words sounded smaller than she intended. "This is what happens when you try to burn a house to roast the last guest," I said. My voice was steady. There was no shout, no crack of fury, just the slow, relentless tone of someone who knows the next move in a long game. "You spent my savings, girl. You thought you could make me sleep on a bench and take my grandson with you. I used what I still have to put his welfare first." She laughed then, a brutal sound. "You can't stop me from selling that house. You can't stop me from changing the locks. I have a life to start, Daddy. You're old. You're sentimental. It's pathetic." The words were meant to wound. Instead, they only widened the emptiness where love used to be. I let her make the next mistake. She tapped at her phone, called the man she thought would protect her, Titus, that easy smile and cheap watch who had smelled opportunity the morning he'd learned Vera had access to my accounts. He arrived the day she expected him, swaggering in as if he had bought the place with his presence. He wore new clothes, the kind of clothes that screamed borrowed success. Titus's grin faltered when he saw the trustee's business card on my table and the notarized statements tucked beside it. He was a showy man, all bluff and thin courage, and bluffs crack under pressure. I watched him like I was watching the tide eat at the sand, patient, inevitable. "What are you doing?" he asked, the bravado stripped to a nervous bark. "You can't." He stopped because the legal man smiled politely and said, "Mr. Hayes, I'm here to ensure the child's best interests are maintained. We'll arrange temporary guardianship until these financial affairs are settled. I'll work with local services to place Micah with a family member if necessary. However, the grandfather has explicitly requested temporary custody if Miss Hayes is unavailable." Vera's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. "You can't, Dad, you can't take him from me." Her voice cracked on the last word like a child reciting a line she'd never learned properly. "Oh, I can," I said, and there was no malice in the statement, only the heavy responsibility of someone who'd watched a small boy's life be traded like poker chips. "And if it comes to it, I will. I did not build his childhood for it to be gambled away." The neighbors noticed. That's the merciless engine that does more damage than law sometimes. Neighbors with time on their hands and opinions in their pockets. A week later, the local PTA president whispered to half the block that Vera had been spotted at a high-end furniture store with a man whose name none of us knew, as if she were staging a life on credit and borrowed light. The church ladies fanned the rumor until it became a chorus. The supermarket cashier who'd known me since I was a young man smiled sadly and said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Barrett," as if conveying condolences. She retaliated with shrillness and threats, the kind that sound dangerous until you understand their only noise. She posted a live stream in which she played the victim, an elderly father abandoned, an ungrateful man clinging to property. Comments came, of course, sympathy, outrage, the occasional sincere plea to reconcile. But most were shallow, pebbles against a dam built of deeds and signatures. People believed what they heard from those they trusted most, and the trustee had quietly made sure the people who mattered heard the truth. Night after night, I sat awake with a calendar full of letters and petitions, the slow machinery of law and community turning in favor of whoever had proved the integrity of their claim. I did not want to destroy my daughter, I confess that freely, but I would not allow her greed to hollow out the life of a child she'd promised to care for. Then, in the gray of a Tuesday morning, she made the final, unforgivable misstep. She attempted to change the locks at noon while I was at the county office signing what would become the axis of our struggle, a legally enforceable custody arrangement ensuring Micah's shelter and schooling. She hired a locksmith who owed favors to a friend of hers. He came with quiet hands and an even quieter van. I'd expected she might try something desperate. I had a man waiting across the street, a sheriff's deputy I'd known for decades, who said he would simply stand there and witness. No force, no spectacle, only paper and presence. When the locksmith worked the cylinder, he found the deputy at the door, with a copy of the temporary order taped to the dashboard. It was a small thing, a little piece of paper, and it stopped the locksmith's hands like a mild electric shock. He packed his tools in silence and left. Vera's fury broke then, open, raw, and losing. She slammed the door and screamed words that had once been lullabies. She accused me of every sin she felt burdened by. She called me old, mean, petty. She threatened to take him and leave for good, to fight me in court and ruin me publicly. "Do it," I said quietly. "Take the case. Make it public. Let us see who the town believes. Let us see who Micah needs when the friends you choose are gone, and the music stops." She stormed from the house that afternoon. I let her go. I wanted the distance between us to be a furnace purifying decision from impulse. If she wanted the street as her final refuge for both of us, I would let the law, the neighbors, and time decide which version of us would be left standing. When the front door closed, there was a hollow sound that echoed through the room she used to occupy. I sank into my chair, not to rest but to think. Revenge, I kept telling myself, was not cruelty for its own sake. It was instruction wrapped in consequence. She had wanted me on the street. I had chosen, instead, to make her understand what being truly destitute could look like when a child's future has been pawned. Outside, somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. Micah slept through the storm of adult decisions. I stood and walked to his room, to the small desk where he practiced chess and scribbled science projects, and I watched him breathe in that steady, innocent rhythm. No one, no matter how close or how cruel, had the right to trade away the steady things for a life staged on lies. There would be more moves. Much more. The night stretched long and the ledger on my kitchen table bulged with names. But for the first time in days, I felt a clean thing in my chest. Not victory, not triumph, but a hard, certain resolve. I would protect what mattered. And if punishment was the cost of teaching her that some debts cannot be paid with stolen money, then I would pay the cost gladly. It ended not with shouting, not with fists, not even with a courtroom. It ended in silence, the kind that follows when every excuse runs out. 3 weeks after she tried to change the locks, the papers came through. My trustee, Carl, and the deputy all stood with me at the long oak table of the county hall. Vera came too, dragging Titus behind her, dressed in clothes bought on borrowed promises. She still carried that mask of confidence, but it was cracking at the edges. She thought she could charm the officials, play the victim, claim the role of the dutiful daughter mistreated by her aging father. But then came the documents. Deeds in my name, signed decades ago. Bank records proving her withdrawals. The custody petition stamped by a judge who had already reviewed her reckless behavior. And one by one, each sheet of paper stripped her of ground until there was nothing left but the hard floor beneath her feet. When the judge asked her why she had emptied her father's accounts without consent, she stammered something about needing freedom, about having sacrificed her youth, about deserving a new life. But every word sounded like ash. The judge glanced at Micah, who sat quietly with his school books, and then back at me. Her decision was calm, almost gentle. Custody awarded to me, finances under investigation, property secured. Vera didn't cry. She laughed, a brittle, broken laugh that carried more despair than defiance. She stood, muttered something about being finished with this town, and walked out without looking back. Titus followed, pale and silent. Neither of them came to collect their things. A week later, a moving truck arrived with men hired by someone else, clearing out what little she had claimed as her own. The house was quiet after that. Too quiet, maybe. Some nights I would sit on the porch, staring at the street, half expecting to see her figure coming back down the sidewalk, the way she used to as a teenager sneaking home late. But she never came. Neighbors whispered about her, rumors of cheap motels and debts chasing her from place to place. I didn't go looking. She had chosen her exile. Micah stayed. He adjusted faster than I expected. School, friends, the steady rhythm of chess tournaments and science fairs. Sometimes, though, I caught him staring at the empty chair at the dinner table, his lips pressed tight. I told him what I could, that love doesn't always protect us, that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us worst, and that betrayal doesn't erase family, but it changes what the word means. One night, weeks later, he asked me, "Grandpa, do you hate her now?" I thought about it a long time before answering. "No, I don't hate her. Hate would mean I still expected something from her. What I feel is nothing. And sometimes nothing is worse than hate." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than a boy should. And that's how it ended, child, quietly, not with fire, but with cold. She wanted me on the street. Instead, she walked into the emptiness she had built for herself. I remained, in the house I paid for with my back and my hands, raising the grandson she left behind. Revenge, in the end, wasn't about shouting or punishment. It was about surviving longer than her betrayal, about still standing when her greed had crumbled. That was my justice. That was her lesson. And as for forgiveness? Maybe one day. But not today.